Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to the album that I was probably most hyped for the entire year, Coldplay's 7th studio album, A Head Full of Dreams. Now, following the releases of the singles Adventure of a Lifetime and Everglow, I thought this album was going to be one of my favorites, and that's kind of why I waited until after this album came out to do my top 10 albums of the year. If you guys didn't notice, it didn't make my top 10 albums of the year, partially because I'm going to make December's releases this year, or if an album came out in December and I really love it, I'm going to push it to best of 2016. That's just how I'm going to do, because I'm kind of putting a cutoff date between November and December. So luckily, some of the albums that come out this month might be able to make the list, although we've got a lot of awesome releases coming out next year, so it still might not happen. But Coldplay's always been one of my favorite bands, and it's probably my favorite rock band per se in the world, and I've been a big fan ever since the release of Milo Xyloto. I've always liked their music before that too. And with this album, I was expecting a sound a little bit closer to Milo Xyloto, and although that's not really what we got, that's not really what pushed me away either. If you guys remember, the release of Ghost Stories was probably one of my favorites ever. They kind of just randomly announced it, pulled through with this really somber album about heartbreak and divorce. And overall, I had a lot of meaningful connections to it, and I thought the album was absolutely beautiful in a lot of ways. They pulled off a lot of different sounds that I've never seen before from them, a little bit closer to the electronic and dance sounds. I think those were awesome. With this album, they pull a little bit closer to a pop sound, which I thought was going to be closer to Milo Xyloto, and a lot of people are comparing those. But the only thing I really see similar to that album is probably the artwork, and they do have a very similar color scheme, no pun intended on the track Color Spectrum. I honestly think this one's sound is a little bit closer to Viva La Vida or Death and All His Friends than Milo Xyloto. And if it was closer to that, I would have been a lot more excited when I was listening to this, because honestly I absolutely love that album. One of my all-time favorites, honestly, Milo Xyloto was. But with this one, I see them drawing into a backwards line from where they were with their last album, kind of taking these meaningful styles and making it unique to them. I think this one is probably their least unique album they've ever released. Yeah, this one's probably my least favorite Coldplay album thus far. I did like Parachutes too. That one's probably my second least favorite. That was at a time where not a lot could be expected from them as their debut album. This one is their 7th studio, and they've released album after album of good content, and I haven't been disappointed with them up to this point. Like I said, there are a lot of really awesome tracks like Adventure of a Lifetime and Everglow. There's an awesome collab with Beyonce called Him for the Weekend, uncredited of course. The first 2 tracks are fairly disappointing, A Head Full of Dreams and Birds. They always seem to use the Birds theme. I think they did on the last album, and they also had Up with the Birds back on Milo Xyloto, and they also have Speed of Sound, where it says birds come flying at the speed of sound, on the X and Y album. So they always kind of have this birds theme, but in this case it was my least favorite and the most blunt of the bunch. On the track Fun, Tove Lo has an appearance that isn't even worth crediting, simply just doing background vocals. There's absolutely nothing that highlights what she does. I think Beyonce probably deserved the credit on this album more than Tove. If you guys remember, Tove's album was also one of my favorites of 2014. Queen of the Clouds was incredible and showed off so many different styles of in production and everything. This song is something that doesn't pull that off well at all. Of course, there's some pretty cool entries in here, like the track Kaleidoscope and Color Spectrum. Of course, there's a good sampling of Obama, which I actually kind of like, that made me end up checking out Obama singing Amazing Grace yesterday, which was pretty cool to watch, and that's of course sampled in the track Kaleidoscope. Following Kaleidoscope, we get the track Army of One, which is probably the worst on the record, along with the hidden track X Marks the Spot, which is just cringy. Probably the most cheesy lyrics. It seems to be everyone's least favorite on this one. It's just pretty generic, lackluster, and just super cheesy lyrics that I really don't think anyone's going to enjoy that's been a long-time Coldplay fan, dealing with more in-depth lyrics like on the track The Scientist that they did a long time ago. And they had a lot of good political lyric sets on Viva La Vida, and just happy bunches of lyrics that were deep but still cheerful and bright on Milo Xyloto, and a little bit more somber on Ghost Stories. But with this one, we get a pretty bland set of lyrics, and I think that might be due to the part that this album came out so close to Ghost Stories, only being about a year and a half apart, which is pretty strange for Coldplay considering they usually take maybe 3 years or 2 at max to release a new studio album. Of course, there are a few good entries in here, and it would be stupid of me to not mention them. Up&Up, An Amazing Day. Of course, there's Everglow, like I said, which is probably my absolute favorite on the album. But this album's runtime is very, very similar. I actually looked at the stats. This one's only 3 minutes longer than Ghost Stories, even though it's 2 entire songs longer, and I'd probably credit the fact that the interlude tracks were on here. Even though these are added, it really doesn't add too much to the album. Like I said, Kaleidoscope is pretty magical, but Color Spectrum kind of seems just thrown in, maybe a repetition of Kaleidoscope. Overall, this album was just pretty underwhelming and extremely disappointing. Probably if you're a longtime Coldplay fan, you're not going to dig this. If you're a new Coldplay fan, you might like this one. That's how a lot of people were feeling about Milo Xyloto. I didn't feel that sound, that same kind of pop, bright, cheery sound that they had on that album. But this one, while it's not god-awful, it's just extremely underwhelming for being in such a hype album, and probably what they've announced to be their last final per se album. From what I remember, they weren't saying that they weren't going to do another album after this, but this is going to be kind of the finale of Coldplay doing their last tour along with this. Really didn't love this one. Like I said, it does have its gems, but it is missing a large part that I think Coldplay used to have in their music, and they kind of just rushed this one, using a bit more of a pop sound and sounds that we've heard over and over again in the music industry. Don't think this one deserves any higher than a 6.5. I was just tossing around different ratings in my head, and I think 6.5 is probably the most deserving of the bunch. Reviews from other critics seem pretty mixed at this point to average, and I think for the most part this album is pretty average, and I was expecting a lot more from Coldplay following the release of the amazing Ghost Stories, and even their live album I probably liked more than this one. But anyway, what do you guys think of the album? A lot of my friends are thinking this album's pretty good, so let me know in the comments what you think. If you're a longtime Coldplay fan like me, or if you could say long time, I've been listening to their music since Milo Xyloto, so that's not actually that long, but if you're a longtime Coldplay fan, you're probably going to have the same opinion as me. I think they pull it off in some ways, but in a lot of ways I think they just fell pretty flat. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hope you enjoyed my review, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.